All right, so we can move to the first. So again, I'm Christina Hartman from the Assistance Fund. We are a charity that's been going for about 10 years now. Our DC office opened just about 2 years ago this summer. We are located in the Met Square building right in downtown DC. So hopefully you can all come and join us in person at some point. If you're ever in the city, we'd love to see you. The Assistance Fund is a 501c3 independent charitable patient assistance organization. We assist underinsured patients and their families that are facing high medical out-of-pocket costs. About our programs, next slide. So the Assistance Fund manages more than 70 disease-specific programs, each of which covers at least one FDA-approved treatment for a specific disease. Over half of our funds are rare, which is why we have had such a big presence in the rare disease community. We offer 3 types of assistance: copay assistance, premium assistance, and assistance with medical incidentals. There's no cap on the amount of assistance we provide to patients in a calendar year once they're approved, and we enroll patients on a first-come, first-served basis. 85% of our patients currently are Medicare beneficiaries. So you might be wondering, why are we so concerned with Medicaid? As you all know, 95% of all human diseases do not currently have an FDA-approved treatment. So TAF, while we're very concerned with our patients of today and do a lot of work with that 85% of our individuals who are Medicare beneficiaries, we're also very worried about the patients of tomorrow and ensuring that as new transformative therapies come online, particularly in the rare space, our patients have access. As you all know, the majority of new drug approvals are for rare disease indications. So we are going to see an increase in Medicaid going forward. 93% of all donations to TAP, that's 93 cents of every dollar that comes into this organization, goes straight to our disease-specific funds. Next slide. So since 2009, when we started, we have served nearly 135,000 unique individual patients, and we've provided over $1 billion in assistance. In 2020, we served nearly 60,000 patients, and we currently serve patients in all 50 states and US territories. Next slide. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about why we're here in Washington, DC. Our CEO, Mark McGreevy, has over the past 10 years built up an incredible charity that does a great job of assisting individual patients. A couple of years ago, Mark McGreevy said, we really need to think about how we can assist patient populations. There are so many excellent patient advocacy groups, individual disease organizations that have agendas that they want to move in Washington. We'd like to do a great job of assisting these patient populations. So that was the impetus for opening our DC office. If you go to tafcares.org, you can click on the link to our advocacy work, and you'll see that we are currently advocating to ensure all patients have access to all the clinical care, diagnostic testing, therapy, and treatment that they require, and that they receive it at an out-of-pocket cost within reach, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Next slide. So something else that I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of is why I'm so passionate about Medicaid coverage for genomic sequencing. So in addition to running the Washington office at the Assistance Fund, I have 2 daughters. My youngest daughter, Charlotte, pictured here, will be 5 years old this weekend. Charlotte has a rare neurogenetic disorder, which we only discovered when she was about 6 months old and stopped meeting her milestones. And we set off on a diagnostic odyssey that took over a year. Next slide. So thankfully, having been in health policy for 20 years now, I live in Bethesda, Maryland, a couple blocks from the NIH. I started my career in the federal government. We have access to the incredible clinicians at Children's National Hospital in Washington, DC. We had a world-class geneticist, Dr. Kenneth Rosenbaum, who works with Dr. Marshall Summer, who may also be on this call, at Children's National, and he wanted what was wrong with Charlotte. So, we went through a whole slew of an initial tests. The chromosomal microarray was one of the first ones. It was not definitive. We had an abnormal MRI, a whole slew of different things. And by September of 2018, Dr. Rosenbaum wanted to do a whole exome sequencing. So at the time, my husband was employed with Fortune 500 self-insured company Booz Allen Hamilton. We had a platinum insurance plan, best insurance money can buy, and they denied this test. They deemed it experimental. We moved forward anyway. Lucky for us, at that point in time, these costs were being, at this point, they are having to balance bill because none of this is free. But that whole exome test did give us an answer. Charlotte has an AA10 related disorder, ultra rare. You can look it up. There's maybe 100 people around the world that we know of this. We're finding more every day. There was just a 38-year-old woman in Rhode Island who was identified because we're seeing more and more genomic sequencing taking place. Next slide. So unfortunately, there's no treatment for NA10. However, with the diagnosis, we were able to connect with her researcher, Dr. Golson Lyon, who's based at the Institute for Basic Research in Developmental Disabilities in Staten Island in New York. So Dr. Lyon was able to obtain NIH funding for a natural history study, and our family went up there in January of 2020, met Dr. Lyon, and like many of the other families are participating in this natural history study, which, as we all know, is the first step to trying to find a treatment for these disorders. Next slide. Also on the call, I know we're joined by Global Genes, and so I was part of a group with many of you on the call to put together this Global Genes document, Access to Critical Therapies Guiding Principles. And the principle that we came up with was ensuring timely and sustainable access to diagnostic testing. So this document was submitted to all of you in advance of the call. It is available on the Global Genes website. And you can see there on the right, there are a number of one-pagers, which I believe Jordan McSherry has also joined us on the call, and she had a huge role in helping develop those one-pagers on timely and sustainable access to diagnostic testing. So thank you, Jordan. Next slide. I also wanted to point out, I know EveryLife is also on the phone with us. The EveryLife Foundation recently issued a National Economic Burden of Rare Disease study. And this is another reason why we know diagnostic testing is so important. So we can really capture the entire patient population, especially of these ultra rare and rare disorders. Ultimately, this kind of information will allow us to ask for more and more government resources to put behind the rare disease community and move the ball forward. So now, next slide. I wanted to turn it over to Remy Brim, but before I do that, just briefly, all know who's in the room with us, because I know those of you on the phone, you can see everybody in the chat box, but we are joined in the room. I'm Christina Hartman, Ryan Dahlbeck, our Legislative Affairs Manager at the Assistance Fund, Stephanie Marshall, our Director of Patient Advocacy at the Assistance Fund, Melanie Gaylord, who is managing our Washington office at the Assistance Fund, Michelle McClure and David Carpenter from the American College of Medical Genetics, and then Remy Brim and Dan Farmer from BGR Group, who will be presenting to us. So Remy, turning it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Christina, and thanks for everyone joining the phone. Looking forward to hopefully seeing more people in person soon, maybe after Labor Day, but good to see y'all that are in the room, and thanks for everyone joining. I'm going to give a very high level update of what is going on in Washington. There's a lot of press, a lot of coverage about, infrastructure and all the different things happening. So wanted to give a little lay of the land and timelines as we talk about some of these more granular policies. We all have an overview of sort of the opportunities in the Shopline Bowl. So there's a lot of things happening. I'll sort of start by looking at this in sort of three buckets: what's happening in Congress, what's happening at the various agencies, and what's happening in the White House. So we have a new president this year, President Biden. We are slowly starting to staff up his new administration. From the folks we talked to that are there and that have started their sort of new careers, they have said that they're sort of building the plane as they're flying it. So have patience with them. They want to meet with everyone. They want to sort of dig into these issues. but they are, they're figuring out how to run an administration that's new, and they're doing it, a lot of them remotely still. Those that work at the agencies, those that work in the White House are still not back in person. So they are also struggling with some of those things that we're all struggling with right now. So I say that to always give your government staffers a little bit of patience and grace when we try to talk to them. They are very focused on getting us out of the COVID-19 pandemic. They are very focused on looking at getting vaccines overseas, dealing with the Delta variant, sort of all the things that we've been hearing about on sort of COVID-19 that is still very sort of front and center to their mind, because that is going to sort of dictate how much else they can get done within their agenda. They're also very focused on infrastructure. We've all heard about the big infrastructure plans, the bipartisan infrastructure deal that they have struck. There is that deal, which is very much hard infrastructure. So roads, bridges, broadband, things that we normally think about it as infrastructure, as well as soft infrastructure, which is also referred to as the American Families Plan. So we don't think about sort of infrastructure as being hard and soft, but this is this is talking about infrastructure that helps people. So healthcare and childcare and affordable college. And, these are sort of longstanding Democratic priorities, and they are thinking about this as sort of the second part of infrastructure for the country. The other thing I'll note is that the administration is very behind this concept of ARPA-H. For those of you who have not heard about ARPA-H, it is similar to a BARDA or a DARPA, which one is medical advanced research, one is centered in the Department of Defense, looking at sort of DoD specific applied research and development. But this would be sort of a new entity that would focus just on really complex healthcare issues. The idea is this would sit inside the NIH. It would have by the end of September. We do have a debt ceiling limit coming up here in a couple months. And we also have sort of yearly Medicare and TAC centers that need to get done. So even though those aren't getting the same type of press as COVID and infrastructure and all these different priorities, those are really the only things that have to get done this year. And those are really going to affect the timeline and affect how much other things get done. The other things getting done that I think most of us care about are things like a Cures 2.0, things like some of the drug pricing efforts that have been floated in Congress. Cures 2.0 discussion draft was released, that wasn't last week, it was 2 weeks ago now. They are looking for stakeholder comments by July 16th. For those keeping track at home, that is in a couple weeks. So if you are looking to submit comments, please do so in the next couple of weeks, because I think the sooner we can get sort of stakeholder comments to them, the sooner they can start sorting through all of these different issues. So Cures 2.0 is sort of happening in a pretty different environment than the first iteration of Cures, which I know we were all around for in some form or fashion. This is starting out without a lot of committee involvement or committee interest, which is a little bit different than where we started in the first round in Cures, both in the House and the Senate. And so the way that we've been thinking about Cures 2.0 is really a way to have policies vetted by stakeholders, to have a menu of options that are priorities for this community in order to have those ready to go for any type of moving vehicle that might be willing to carry some of those individual pieces. I would also note that even though the political winds, in my sort of personal opinion, don't seem to be looking toward an independent Cures 2.0 vehicle, we've seen President Biden, when he was vice president, really shepherd along Cures 1.0 in a pretty tricky environment. And given that it does have language on ARPA-H, which is a big priority for him, there may be an opportunity likely next year when things on the other front calm down, that there might be a possibility for something like that moving. The other thing we're watching is all the different drug pricing conversations. So we all have heard about HR3, which is the big House bill. The big focus of that is the Title I of that particular bill, which would basically index the price of drugs, certain drugs, to an international reference price. Senator Wyden and Senator Crapo sort of have dueling visions of what a drug pricing bill might look like. And there's sort of an overall continued consternation in the Democratic Party of the high cost of prescription drugs and access to drugs. And so whether or not some of these proposals move will also depend on sort of the various wins of the various vehicles that move. Outside of Congress and the White House, there's a lot going on within the individual agencies. CMS, I'll let Dan sort of dig deep into CMS when he talks about the ESPDT program, but we have a lot of things we're following. There are various rules that can really help access to new products, such as the value-based payment rule, which allow a little more creativity in Medicaid. We're always looking at the annual rulemaking for inpatient and outpatient as new drugs are coming to market. And we're looking at, who are the players that are there. We saw this week that Center for Medicaid is going to actually be led by Daniel Tsai, who's the current Massachusetts Medicaid director. He has done a lot in Massachusetts on trying to lower prescription drug costs for Medicaid programs. So we're watching his interests as they come together for the administration pretty closely as well. On the FDA front, that is one place that only has one political there right now. They have no commissioner, and there is likely no commissioner, I would say, on the horizon. Janet Woodcock, who was the former director of the Center for Drugs, is now the acting commissioner. It was widely sort of prevailing winds at the beginning were that she would be the nominee, but there has been some pretty controversial things that have happened in the last 7 months since she's been acting commissioner. They also have the issue that she has been at FDA for a long time, and a lot of people have feelings about things that have happened at FDA during her tenure. And so a lot of different members, including Senator Manchin, have pretty strong views about how FDA has handled opioids. And Senator Manchin is someone who's really critical for the administration's efforts on infrastructure. So the administration has until November to nominate someone. She cannot stay in an acting role due to the Vacancies Act longer than November. As soon as they have a nominee, she could stay in place as acting for as long as they want, basically under the act, as long as they have a nominee. And so they have some time, but we are watching closely who is going to lead that agency, because there is a lot going on, including having to reauthorize the user fees, which is a once every 5 years vehicle to make legislative changes to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, as well as take some of the scrutiny that has been being placed on the accelerated approval program, and deal with some of the bigger issues coming down the pipe, such as tobacco, and having to get PMTAs out there for Juul and other of the electronic cigarette companies by September. So a busy time for the agency. Next slide, Ryan, or Melanie, sorry. I'll start talking as it switches, but just want to leave you with a timeline, and I believe Christina will share the slides at the end, but just to give you a sense of everything that's happening. By 2021, I can't believe it. I feel like the beginning of this year went faster than even last year, but they are going to try to advance this bipartisan infrastructure at the same time they're doing an FY 2022 budget resolution. What that means is it would unlock a process called budget reconciliation, which would allow Democrats to move their quote unquote soft infrastructure priorities, which I talked about before, without any Republican support. So they have said that they would like to do some sort of reconciliation over the summer and be totally done with it. I think that is crazy ambitious and likely won't happen, because as we know in DC, next recess is always the time we say things are going to get done. There are things that need to get handled, like the debt ceiling, like the funding of the government. So we do expect that they may actually come together on this bipartisan infrastructure deal. They may get the budget resolution done, but I think we're going to be looking at trying to complete some sort of reconciliation package by the end of the year, as well as probably dealing with government funding at the end of the year if they can pass some sort of continuing resolution to get us to December. December is important because these Medicare extenders we referenced do expire. When extenders expire and we have to keep them going, we have to pay for them. And that's where you have concerns about potential drug pricing pay-fors to come together, but it's also an opportunity, especially as we're thinking about things in the Medicaid program. If there are places people want to make cuts, people want to bolster, it is those end of the year packages, those big omnibus packages that afford us sort of the most opportunity to advance legislation like the ones we're going to talk about today. Throughout 2022, we will see what happens with reconciliation. It could move all the way over. They could do reconciliation for that budget resolution all the way through September, but we think they'll get done hopefully by the end of the year. And then we'll be really looking at the FDA side of the coin with the PDUFA legislative process going on in the Health Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee. And 2022 is already an election year again. So some of these big ticket items, massive drug pricing changes or massive infrastructure deals, folks don't really like to engage in those types of events right before an election. They sort of get those done and develop their messaging and really go home and campaign. So a little bit quieter, hopefully, next year. But a lot of opportunity in the next year. Again, there's always the government funding deadlines that have to get done, as well as a great time for administrative action once this administration has their feet wet. They've had, sort of the entire year and can really turn to advancing the types of administrative priorities they want to advance. I know I just threw a lot at folks. I'm happy to take questions if folks have questions on sort of overall calendar and what's going on. I'm happy to talk.
Thank you, Remy. So did anyone have any questions? I know there are a lot of folks on the line, so if you want to unmute and ask any questions, please feel free to do so.
Clear as mud, I know.
Great. Well, thank you, Remy.
Sure.
And next up, we have Dan Farmer, also of BGR Group, who's going to talk about Medicaid and the ESPDT benefit, EPSDT.
So in my presentation today, I'm going to provide a little bit of background information. Apologies to folks on the phone who already know it, but then pivot a little bit to how the EPSDT benefit might fit into our discussions about Medicaid coverage for genomic sequencing, a little bit different for children than it would for adults. So let's start with real basics here. EPSDT, Early Periodic Screening Diagnostic Treatment. This is a smaller scope of benefits. If we can move to the next slide here. This is a scope of benefits made available to children mandated by the federal government. Now, typically when we talk about Medicaid, everybody's favorite saying is, if you want to learn about Medicaid, you really have to go to all 50 states and all 50 Medicaid programs and see how they're implementing their programs differently. Well, there are some federal parameters and some federal mandates on the states that they must meet in order to get their federal matching funds. And one of them is around EPSDT. So broadly what EPSDT does is it requires state Medicaid programs to cover a set of benefits for children under 21 in any amount that's medically necessary, which means not just one time, but potentially periodically and on a repeated basis, with the goal of keeping children healthy, flagging health issues at a young age and giving an opportunity for early intervention. Just to give a sense of the scope of how many people this applies to, some token stats here from MacPac. Over 40 million children are eligible for EPSDT, but clearly under 60% of them take advantage of it. There are always access issues with children in the Medicaid program and making sure they're aware of even things like the EPSDT benefits. So next slide. At a high level, we're talking about screenings, vision benefits, dental benefits, and hearing benefits. Again, with the intent of flagging problems earlier on. But the screening is where there's a lot of wiggle room. We can move ahead. So first of all, just to reiterate this important point, screenings are, the mandate to cover screenings is not a one-time thing. States don't have to cover one screening for each child. It has to be on a schedule and repeated periodic screening, depending on the specific benefit that the states have set up. Now, the states do have wiggle room to set up the intervals that make sense, but the federal statute is very clear that this is not a one-time thing. We're talking about screening kids repeatedly based on standards that the state set. The minimum set of screenings the states have to offer either comprehensive health and developmental history, an unclothed physical exam, appropriate immunizations, which obviously vaccinations are a huge issue for children, lab tests, and health education. And importantly, the benefit doesn't just cover the screenings themselves. We can't uncover something in a screening and say, well, good luck fixing that. The benefit is very clear that states need to cover anything that's medically necessary to cover or to address things that come up in the screenings. That can be further diagnostic services and treatment, really anything that the Medicaid benefit could cover for anybody in the population, both the mandatory benefits and also the optional benefits. But as we're looking at this from the perspective of genomic sequencing, I think there are a lot of folks on the phone here who believe that children would really benefit from consistent access to genomic sequencing and the opportunity to have better access to identifying issues that come up. Because of the way the statute is written, there is a strong mandate on the states to cover ESPDT, but as with virtually everything in the Medicaid program, there's also significant wiggle room for all of the 50 states. So the 50 states have an opportunity to interpret those mandates differently, based on their particular opinion. And the term you'll see a lot when talking about ESPDT is medical necessity. What is the state what is medically necessary for the state to cover in order to address things that are coming up in the screenings? And there's significant latitude in how the states can interpret that. In addition, states also have the opportunity to impose prior authorization requirements and I call it cost effectiveness considerations, but states do have latitude to mandate that, states do have latitude to take into account the cost of a particular service. So if there's a less costly alternative, they have the opportunity to offer that as well. So we had a conversation with some of the CMS career staff a couple of weeks ago where we sort of raised this question to them too and said, well, in your opinion, how does genomic sequencing interface with the ESPDT benefit? Do you see a space where the federal government might wind up requiring or having the ability to require states to cover genomic sequencing? As frequently happens when you talk to CMS, it wasn't really a yes or no, but there was a, well, have you talked to any states? And I think what's made pretty clear here is this is another issue where all of the 50 states are going to have their own opportunity to look at genomic sequencing and decide where they see that benefit fitting into the ESPDT benefits that they're offering to patients. So there are some states that have made genomic sequencing widely available. There are some states that are probably still trying to decide what they think about genomic sequencing. I know we have a lot of folks on the phone who have been involved in that work for a while. But what this tells us is it's going to be very difficult to get the federal Medicaid agency administratively to put some kind of mandate on states to offer coverage here. And that speaks to, again, why some of the legislative activity has been going on the last couple of years. So that I can stop and open to questions. Was to provide a very basic level of knowledge and then a very basic level of update and conversations we've had here. But I understand that could lead to a lot of questions.
Thank you, Dan. And one additional item I wanted to raise, and I know there are some folks from the autism community on here too. I see Angela Lello who may have something to add, but one of the key items of importance in terms of having a diagnosis is once you have that diagnosis, at least in the state of Maryland, there's a habilitative law that then requires the state to actually provide coverage for things like physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. In our case, we also get applied behavioral therapy. But many of these kids that are never going to reach the potential of a typical child, you know, Charlotte, for example, is the bottom 1% in terms of speech and everything else. I just got her updated Vineland, which is always fun to read, yesterday. But, you know, getting access to these therapies can be very tough. They can be prohibitively expensive. So having that diagnosis can be really important in terms of coverage. And if these kids don't get these therapies, I see Andrea Grotman on the phone as well, who runs neurogenetics at Children's National, and I know she could add to this too. These kids will never reach the top of whatever their full potential is without that early and intense intervention. So I don't know if anybody else wanted to comment on just this really critical having.
Hey, Christina, this is Angela Lello from Autism Speaks. I think you did a really good job of explaining why it's so important. And I think when you think of a condition like autism spectrum disorder that affects, you know, 1 in 49 children in the United States, you might not assume, oh, that's a rare condition, but there's actually a significant portion, you know, over 30% of children with autism have a genetic component that underlies their condition and their diagnosis. And so when it comes to developing the personalized interventions that will be most successful, it's really important to have that genomic sequencing as sort of a guide or a compass to identifying and accessing the treatment through Medicaid that can be most effective. Thank you for sharing your story, Christina.
Thanks, Angela. I see Betsy.
This is Betsy Foss Campbell from the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapy, and I just want to add and emphasize that one of the big benefits of early diagnosis is access to clinical trials in gene therapies, since there are 825 gene therapies for rare diseases that are in development from preclinical point onward. So that's another important benefit.
Thank you. And Dr. Andrea Grotman, I don't know if she's available to speak, if she wanted to say anything from her perspective as a clinician. Yeah, we have a lot of folks on the line. I see also the Every Life Foundation. I'm not sure if we have RareX and Global Genes. But if anyone has any comments at this point, you know, please do let us know. Otherwise, we can move over to Michelle McClure from the American College of Medical Genetics. And Michelle, just so you know, I did send out this paper to everyone in advance of the meeting. And it's, I just wanted you guys to see it is available online, but this is very exciting, this development.
Yes, and it's very timely. Makes today's conversation much more straightforward. So as you guys can see by the date on the slide, this publication was just released this morning. This is an evidence-based guideline released by ACMG on exome and genome sequencing for pediatric patients with congenital anomalies and intellectual disability. This is a very, very significant publication in terms of impact to exome and genome sequencing, because these are the types of publications and types of guidelines that not only guide providers in how to go about testing and diagnosing patients with suspected genetic conditions, but these types of guidelines are also relied on heavily by payers, both public and private payers. when trying to decide whether or not something covering a specific diagnostic test is justified, they will often look to professional guidelines. And when we talk about professional guidelines, one of the most common types that we see are consensus guidelines, where you get a bunch of the experts on a single topic together, you get them to all provide their feedback, and they work together to provide a consensus-based practice guideline. And those are fabulous. We rely on them a lot in practice. But the gold standard is really when you can do one of these evidence-based guidelines. The reason why it's a standard is because you're actually looking at as a systematic review using set procedures that are accepted within the United States and in other countries as well. It's a very, very extensive review of all the existing literature and data that is out there on a specific topic. And so what happens with this, and I think this is a part of a new program that ACMG launched a couple of years ago to try to increase our the number of evidence-based guidelines that we have on topics related to genetics and genomics. This is actually the first one that's being published out of that new program, or maybe it's the second one, but still, it's one of the first ones. But what happens with this is we first start with doing the evidence review. We have a team of people who get together, experts who scour thousands and thousands of publications and pieces of data and summarize those all using specific criteria, and that gets published as what we call a systematic evidence review. The systematic evidence review for exome and genome sequencing in pediatrics was published last year. And then once that is published, we are then able to use the information from that review to develop the evidence-based guideline. So it's very time-consuming, a very extensive process. Again, it is one of the gold standards in terms of professional guideline. So this particular guideline, key points, the very first thing, if you look at the results section for anybody who actually wanted to read the guideline, front and center, it clearly says that we recommend exome and genome sequencing as a first-tier or second-tier test, guided by clinical judgment and often clinical patient and family shared decision-making after a CMA, which is a chromosome microarray analysis or focus testing, for patients with one or more congenital anomalies, and for patients with developmental or intellectual disabilities. So our recommendation is pretty clear. One thing that I do want to explain a bit further is that recommendation about a first tier or second tier test. First tier means probably what you think, and that you suspect somebody of having a genetic condition and you start right away with exome or genome sequencing. Second tier means that maybe you start with one or two kind of specific tests to guide that next step and have that plan to follow with the exome or genome sequencing. One test that you might do first would be a chromosome microarray analysis, or some targeted genetic testing or targeted panel, something like that. Now this is as opposed to doing just extensive genetic testing and then feeling like you've exhausted all your options, and so then you go to an exome or genome. So that would not be considered second tier testing. So the explanation for that is important because one of the findings about cost effectiveness is that in both scenarios, using exome or genome sequencing led to what's found to increase diagnostic yield. But in terms of cost effectiveness, when you do exhaustive testing first and then go to exome or genome sequencing, it was at a higher cost, overall cost. Whereas the evidence showed that if you are doing this as a first or second tier test, that it was more cost effective. So that's a significant finding in there too, especially in terms of this is a document, this is a guideline that we can now use to try to advocate to payers to encourage them to improve their coverage of exome and genome sequencing and this pediatric population. So with that, I would say that this was just published today. We have a press release that went out. There will be some social media posts about it. I encourage everybody, and we can share the links for those as well. But I encourage everybody to share those links with any contacts you have, share the social media posts, because it is important that patient groups are aware of this and know to share this with payers as well. We want to make sure all the public and private payers are aware of this and start doing outreach with them to make sure that they're educated on this topic and realize that the evidence is there. This is not experimental. This is a clinically valid test. There's clinical utility on this, and there's evidence to support doing this early, using this type of testing early on for these types of patients. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that there are about.
Thank you. And Dr. Groveman, I know we think we successfully unmuted you if you wanted to try to make a comment now. All right, apologies. I don't think that that's working. All right, Dr. Groveman, if you do end up unmuted, please let us know, because I know everyone would love to hear your comments as a clinician. I think she's going to type some, so please check your chat for that. But thank you, Michelle. I know that this guideline has been a long time in coming, so very exciting development. Next, we wanted to turn it over to some of the patient groups to really give their perspective about what's happening, what they're seeing, and also really wanted to thank, in particular, the Every Life Foundation. I see Dylan Simon on here. He's been really instrumental in helping us move this issue forward. Also, Brett Copeland from Epidermolysis bullosa has done quite a bit of work. And I think that there are a few other patient groups, but I see Dylan, it looks like you're ready to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to hop in. And first and foremost, thank you guys at the Citizen Sun for all the great work you guys are doing on this issue and on this legislation. And obviously, this is a big deal for the rare disease community, with the diagnostic odyssey being what it is. Christina obviously cited our National Economic Burden of Rare Disease study at the top of the call, and highlighted how it can take on average 6.5 years approximately from first symptom to diagnosis. And this issue can really help to try to limit that diagnostic odyssey. And so this has been really important for the rare disease community to really try to address ways to improve the diagnostic. Too often our conversations center around therapeutics, which we all know are vital and are really important, but we also need to make sure that we're having these parallel conversations about diagnostics and ensuring that the rare disease community is getting the diagnoses they need to get to the treatment. And so again, really love the fact it's been a great presentation today, really learned a lot, and looking forward to continue working with you guys. And in addition, our Community Congress, which is our strategic advisory council within the Every Life Foundation, has been really supportive of this issue, of working to improve this issue. And so we're really looking forward for both parts of the foundation and the Community Congress to continue to kind of push forward with this. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dylan. And any other patient groups or others? I know we had separated out on the agenda patient groups and other stakeholder perspectives, but we've gotten things done a lot faster than I had imagined. So if anybody else would like to provide a comment or perspective, we'd love to hear from you. And just some information about why this group has really exploded. We also have an access working group through Global Genes. It's something that I'm working with Kari Rosbeck from tuberous sclerosis and Laura from Pfizer Gene Therapies. We've been working with a lot of the companies on these issues as well. So that's why this invite ended up going out to that entire group. And I think we have twice as many participants as we'd initially expected on this call. So if there's anyone who would like to provide any perspective or thoughts, particularly on the importance of diagnosis, please do let us know. As Michelle said, we really need to continue to advocate with the payers for coverage. And we're also looking to really continue to educate lawmakers about why it is so important for clinicians to have access to whatever diagnostic test they deem appropriate for their particular patient. So is there anyone else who'd like to provide a comment or perspective? If not, we can move over to Ryan Dahlbeck, who is our Legislative Affairs Manager at the Assistance Fund, and he was just going to run through some of the work that's been done, starting with this excellent sign-on letter, Ryan, that Ryan had put together with Dylan and several other folks on the call.
Yeah, so thank you guys for the time. Thanks for everybody for calling in and listening. To kind of start off about how the Assistance Fund got interested in advocating for this issue was my predecessor before, Jordan McSherry, who's on the call, did some great work. When Cures 2.0 was initially floated last year, she wrote a letter to Upton and Get on Tap's behalf to just kind of mention it as a priority that we wanted to see included later. And she began working with Congressman Swalwell's office to get some legislation introduced and start finding a champion for this issue in Congress. So when I came onto the Assistance Fund this year, one of the first things I did was working on this letter that we sent to both Congressman Swalwell and Congressman Peters, since they were the authors of the two different pieces of legislation on this issue from the 116th Congress last year. And then we CC'd it to Upton and DeGette, Kathy McMorris Rogers and Pallone, and then Eshu and Guthrie. So some of the leaders on Energy and Commerce, Cures 2.0, the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee. And it ended up being a great letter. We got a lot of signatures. We got a lot of feedback from many of you on the call. So we're very appreciative of that. And it was really just going to show how many people are really truly interested in working on this issue with us. And that's very reassuring to us. Some of the other things that we've been working on were we've been in pretty frequent contact with Sarah Shapiro, who is Representative Swalwell's new healthcare staffer, and I believe she might even be on the call still. But she's been a great ally for us, somebody that we're always bouncing ideas off of and with. And it's just a great resource. She knows the issue pretty well, and is working very hard with Congressman Peters' staff to sort of get something more concrete working. So she did some great work to get what we saw in the Cures 2.0 discussion draft. And so that was something that we were very happy to see. It ultimately got included. We had a call with a staff member from Representative DeGette's office, which kind of confirmed that it was going to be in Cures 2.0, and was great to hear that it's a priority of both Upton and so that was very reassuring. Some of the other things that we're working on is recently, within the last couple of weeks, in the Senate, a bill that was introduced last year has been reintroduced, which only supports whole genome sequencing and not whole exome as well, or gene panels and other technologies. This was introduced by Senators Collins, Menendez, and Mark Kelly from Arizona. So we're starting to take meetings with those staff just to introduce ourselves and the coalition, who we're working with, to let people over on the Senate side know that, hey, we're working with these people over on the House, and these are some of the groups that are interested in it, so that we can start to build up those relationships over on the Senate side. So we had one with Menendez. We have one scheduled with Senator Kelly actually after this call later this afternoon. So if any participants on this call are not aware of that but are interested in coming, it's at 3 p.m. if you're available. So shoot me either a message in the chat here or at my email address, and I'll be happy to include you. Some other things is, as Dan talked about earlier, we had a meeting with CMS staff to learn more about the ESPDT program, which went very well and is leading us to some future discussions. And then we've been meeting with NCATs at NIH just to develop some more clarity on some of the data and literature that they're publishing on the issue. Next slide, please, Nolan. So to now kind of speak about what we're looking to do moving ahead, we have been in the works of scheduling a meeting with Peter's offices as well as with Collins over on the Senate side. So we're hoping to see ultimately an introduction of a standalone unified bill between the Swallow and the Peters offices. And that's for many practical purposes so that we can get co-sponsors, we can get people to be able to review it and comment on it, we can get constituents to write in support of it. There's a lot of great activity that would be able to happen if we were able to get a piece of legislation and not just a part of a discussion draft. So that's something that we're looking into moving forward. But we're also continuing to meet with different congressional staff, both on the House and the Senate, to educate them about this issue. And like I said earlier, to just continue to build relationships, introduce not only the assistance fund, but all of the groups like Every Life, Deborah, ACMG, ASGCT, excuse me, that we've been constantly working with, and all of you who are interested in continuing to participate in those, we'd be more than happy to share that with you moving forward. And the more advocates, the better, is how we're looking at it. We're also continuing conversations with the NIH and other executive branches to clarify this information. So we've had conversations, we're continuing to have them. I think this ACMG guideline that came out today is going to be very helpful for kind of continuing those conversations as something that we can share with the executive branch. And then off hill, based on some of the ESPDT conversations, we're starting to think about who else we might want to start adding to our coalition and supporters, and whether that's reaching out to the Medicaid directors or the Association of Pediatricians, so that we can both build some support and hope to gain a little bit more understanding about where coverage is currently being provided in the states. And then finally, just continuing to work with all of you partners. I know, like Dylan mentioned, his community Congress, there's a lot of great members in that too who are interested in accessing this diagnostic testing. So a couple of different ways that we're trying to corral more people into our tent and build more support for this moving forward. So that, as Remy said during our legislative update, hopefully we can get enough broad support that this could be moved into a larger vehicle sometime in this Congress.
Thank you, Ryan. And I know we don't have a slide on this, but I do want to highlight, this was sent around in the calendar invite, but the fact that the 21st Century Cures 2.0 discussion draft includes this section 407 on expanding access to genetic testing. This is a huge accomplishment on behalf of the rare disease community. You know, Michelle and ACMG, they've done this incredible work to issue this guideline. Now it's time to make sure that whatever ends up moving legislatively is going to ensure Medicaid coverage for whether it's genomic sequencing or DNA sequencing for medical services, whatever the appropriate definition or term ends up being. We want to see it moved forward in legislation so that coverage is available for Medicaid patients. And then the hope, of course, is that the payers would follow suit, because at present, we are having a lot of issues with people getting whole genome and whole exome sequencing covered by payers. Again, my daughter, it was late 2018, and even at that point in time, and I think still today, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's still typically deemed experimental. And you know, I'll never forget when I finally got the diagnosis, I said to my former colleagues in NIH, you know, I cannot believe it took me a year to get a diagnosis. And they just started laughing and said, that's the fastest diagnosis we've ever heard. And so what I think is so important to keep in mind is that the average time to diagnosis for these rare patients is 5 to 7 years. And we're losing a lot of children before the age of 5. So if we don't succeed in ensuring that coverage is happening, we're going to lose kids and we'll never even know what the underlying genetic cause was. And so there are huge implications for the patients, the patient community, for the industry that's trying to develop treatments and cures for these people. And as Betsy pointed out, we'd like to make sure that patients have access to clinical trials, which you can't do without a diagnosis. So there are a whole host of reasons that we want to move this forward. And so with that, I just want to open it up one more time. I think we're definitely going to be ending early because this went a lot faster than expected. But are there any comments or questions that anyone would like to offer about this issue? The goal of this briefing was really to level set and just make sure everybody's on the same page, because I know there's a lot of conflicting information out there. But if anybody would like to, offer comment to the group, offer perspective, we would love to have it. You guys don't have to be shy. All right, well, seeing none, I guess we will close out the meeting. In terms of next steps, we will shoot a summary to all of you. We will work with Michelle to find out, how we can best support ACMG in getting this new guideline out there and continuing to advocate with the payers. If you're interested in being part of this group of folks that Ryan is working with legislatively, please reach out to Ryan. And Melanie, if you just want to post that last slide on there, you have everybody's contact information on this very last slide here. So it's, I think you guys all have my info, but Ryan Dahlbeck is the one who is leading all of this legislative work for the assistance fund. So please do reach out if you want to engage. Also happy to connect you with Michelle at ACMG, with Remy or Dan from BGR. So just let us know. All right, with that, we'll give you all back about 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.